It's a source of strength for me whenever I utter the word, I'm a woman of color. It's a place of strength. If your listeners would want to take one thing out of this conversation is that the women of color, it's a term that has a lot of power. So own it, step into it.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
We all know first impressions count. Yet, rather than putting their best foot forward, most big-hearted, well-intended coaches are unknowingly starting their relationships with their prospective Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color clients off on the wrong foot by making statements such as the following. No. Where are you from originally? Wow, your English is so good for a Black person. Your skin tone is not dark enough. Are you sure you're from Africa? We have a scholarship program to support people just like you. These subtle yet gut-punching microaggressions can feel like death by 1,000 cuts for a person of color as they are continually reminded they don't belong. That is why I've put together a training called Microaggressions 101, where I help you to understand how to hold safer spaces in your online coaching business that will see you serve a wider and more racially diverse audience. For instant access, head over to anigishuru.com/LT. That's anigishuru.com, gichuru.com/LT. The LT is for live training, and you can find this link in the show notes. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Represented Podcast with me, Aniki Shuru. And today, oh boy, do I have a treat for you. I am joined by Brenda Gaddi, who is the founder and managing director of Women of Color Australia. And this is a non-for-profit organization, and I will let Brenda tell you a little bit more about that. But the conversation we're going to have today, cannot wait for you to hear all the work that she's doing and how she is paving the way. And even before I press record, we were talking about the legacy work that she is doing. And so, Brenda, welcome.
Thanks, Annie. Magandang hapon. That's good afternoon in my native tongue, Tagalog, Filipino. Before I begin with with our lovely conversation, I would just like to ground myself and acknowledge that I'm dialing in from the sovereign land of the Wallumattagal clan of the Darug Nation, and I'd like to pay my deep respects to elders past and present, acknowledging that respect and that acknowledgement to all your listeners who are First Nations peoples, and acknowledging that the lands that we're both standing on, playing in, and having this conversation is and always will be Aboriginal land. That sovereignty was never ceded. As you said, Annie, I'm so excited about this conversation with you. I follow your work. I love what you do. I love what you represent. And, we were talking about just then before you hit press record about the legacy work that we're doing. And so maybe we can start there. Women of Color Australia is an organization, non-for-profit and charity as well, grounded on that, led by the fear of change, that if we create the change now, hopefully in generations of 100 years, 50 years, 200 years, this organization, we don't need to exist anymore.
Wow.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Yeah.
That is powerful. And before we even get to what was the catalyst that led to you wanting to create this? I think for us as women of color, we know we need something like this, but for the wider majority, they may be like, what led you to do this? Before we get to that, I want to talk to the term women of color.
Yes,
It
yes.
is something
Let's.
let's do that. It is something that we who identify in that way, I identify as Black, but I also identify as a woman of color. I would love you to tell us where this term originated from, because a lot of people who don't identify in this way, I feel like they get rubbed off in the wrong
Mhm,
way, and it makes them
mhm.
feel like they're not included. Or what does that mean? Is white not a color if I'm a white woman? So let's go there, Brenda. Let's talk about that.
I love that. Let's do the heavy stuff straight away. The term women of color, Annie, as you would know, it's not a biological designation, as explained by Loretta Rose, a Black feminist in the
Mhm.
States. It's a statement of solidarity. And if we go back into the history books, this year was 1977. There was this National Women's Conference being held in Houston, Texas, and essentially, they want equality for women. And so that conference, there was minority women's flag that they're calling it, and essentially, talking about the needs and wants of the women who are not white. And so when the Black women from Washington, D.C. heard about this conference, they said, you know what? We want to represent ourselves. So they marched or they went and represented. And then along the way, funny thing happened along the way, because Asian women, Latinas, and all these other women from other racial backgrounds, they said, we want to be part of this movement. Sis. Can you let us in?
Yeah.
And so, yes, come on, sisters, we'll welcome you in. But then they said, we can't really call it the Black women's agenda anymore, because obviously we have all these other women.
Yeah.
Hence, the term women of color was born. And so, really going back to how I said in the beginning, it's a statement of solidarity. It's a term that has a lot of power. It's a source of strength for me whenever I utter the word, I'm a woman of color. It's a place of strength. So that's if your listeners would want to take one thing out of this conversation, is that the women of color, it's a term that has a lot of power. So own it, step into it.
That is so powerful in itself. And there was something that led to that. There was a feeling of we're not included, especially when it comes to feminism, Brenda. And I don't know where you stand on matters to do with feminism, but there feels like there is two camps. Like when we try and bring feminism together, it's only addressing one area, and perhaps that is white women and their
Yes.
needs. And once those particular needs are met, if we see a woman step into the C-suite who's a white woman, we feel like there've been some gains there. But there's a whole entire group of women from a race perspective who have been left out.
Yeah, and that's the power of this intersectionality framework coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. So you were right there, because when we talk about diversity in this country, it's always viewed through the prism of gender.
Yes.
Like, enough of that. There are a lot of layers and nuances, and the intersectionalities, the intersections, and let's bring that to the fore. And so for me, I'm a feminist, and that means it's for all of us, and it's grounded in solidarity and sisterhood. And when I speak about sisterhood, Annie, I don't see your experiences as the same with my experiences, because that can never be. Your experiences are uniquely yours, and my experiences are uniquely mine. But having that recognition, having that acknowledgement that what happens to you, Annie, affects me, and what happens to me affects you. So that's important, recognizing that we have this shared humanity together, and we can move things forward as long as I honor your humanity and I honor my humanity as well. So I think for me, feminism is, if we're not centering the voices of the most marginalized, we're just perpetuating the same power structures, and we don't want that, because we know it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Exactly. And even when you look at it from society perspective, if we're not catering to the least in society. That's why we'll continue to see the disparities. We'll continue to see the rich get richer and the poorer get poorer, just because we are not meeting or attending to the needs of those who are the least, who have the most needs, who have been sidelined and marginalized. And if we cannot center that, if we're not meeting those needs, then we are just going to keep growing apart and apart. And this leads me to the question of, what was the catalyst that led you to start a non-for-profit? Because I can imagine that is not an easy journey to say that you're going to start a non-for-profit and knowing just how many hurdles are along the way. What was the thing that made you say, I want to do this, and not necessarily support another organization that is doing something similar in terms of when it comes to issues to do with race?
Thanks, Annie. This organization starting this is deeply personal, Annie. If you see my screen, you'll see on my left or your right. That's my mother right there.
Yes.
She's passed on back in 2020, and this is all shared in the website as well, Annie. So I'm on the other side now. I was diagnosed with clinical depression. I didn't quite know what to do with my grief. I was very close to my mom. At the end of her life, she was at the nursing home. And I said to myself, I was in that deepest, darkest hole, and I think I heard her voice. Maybe it's my grief playing tricks on me. And she was asking me, what are you doing? And so somehow I managed to get out of the hole. Obviously, I needed, I had help, I had the therapist, I had the medicines and all the rest of it. But then really this organization, and it's almost me reaching back in time, wishing that my mom had access to this type of organization where she feels she belongs.
Yeah.
Her voices matter, and it needs to be heard. And so really for me, it's my giant love letter to my mom. That's, that's what really, that's the catalyst, the genesis of this organization. It's really like, how do I honor the memory of my mom? Because to the world, she's just this little Filipino woman, but to me, she's my world. And so, I want to honor that legacy, pursue, keep pushing forward, because, when I was little, she would always tell me, you have a right to exist in this world. And I was like in my head, what is she talking about? And now I get it. And now I get it, because she knew I will encounter all these barriers, because I'm 5'2", I'm short, I'm tiny in stature, I have the accent, I have the brown skin. And she knew that when you grow up, you will get it. And now I get it. And so, so it's deeply personal. And so from the personal, obviously it's, and I want to create a space as well for women who look like me, who sound like me, to enter into these spaces where they are respected, where they are valued, and when they are promoted. Because really the purpose of this organization is to see more of us in positions of power, in leadership positions, but being very, very mindful of not replicating the same power structures that we've inherited, that we're still, in there, operating in. And so for us, our theory of change is, let's change the leadership landscape in this country. Let's reflect who we are as a nation, and let's see that in our politics, in our media, in our tech. So because if the change is not going to happen, if the change is not happening up here, we have to attack it from there, from all the sides, from bottom up, ground up, and all this, we have to have the allies as well, the white people as well. So so I hope that, that gives you an idea of, why I started this organization. So really it's my mom, it's my mama, it's my nanay. The nanay is a Filipino term for mom. Yeah.
It is such a powerful why, because when things get tough, it is our why that helps us to keep going on and keep doing what we created. And so, to give context, because as I was getting ready for our interview, Brenda, I was reading a little bit more about your mom, and you say she migrated here in the 1980s. And so she was not born here, and she came in at a time when there was a lot of hate towards Asians. And so if you can just give context to that, because then it leads to her telling you that you do have a right to belong here. How do you perceive it was for her, migrating at that time, and some of the things that she may have had to have faced and not even spoken about?
It wasn't a topic that was really discussed, Annie. In the Philippines, it's like I'm all right, all good here. But I knew that she experienced a lot of it, and so this was the time where Pauline Hanson, she's still around. We're being swamped by Asians, and all this malignant rhetoric is still around. And so, I knew that, I had to do something about it. And because I have four children, I have two of them are girls, Annie, and I don't want them to experience the same she's experienced. I think you experienced, really want a better place for, the next generation. Yeah.
Mhm. I really appreciate you sharing that. And it is really, really personal what we experience as people of color and the solidarity of coming together. A lot of times we have big dreams of, I want to create a future for my children that is different from the one that I have led. Like your mom wanted a different future for you, and you want a better future for your four children. What steps did you take to make this dream of Women of Color Australia into a reality? Because a lot of times, many people do not get to live out their dreams because it's too hard. There's so much to just go through. There's a lot of red tape as well and
Yeah.
bureaucracy.
Huh? Hmm.
How did you establish this organization? What steps did you take?
Yeah, so mentors are very important. Back in 2015, I got involved with an organization called All Together Now. So they are a racial justice organization, and their vision, if you will, is to see an Australia that is free of racism. Big, bold vision. And I'm like, I want to get behind that. And so from there, I met the founder and the managing director, a white woman, solid ally, and a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. And so when my time there really planted the idea of maybe one day I could start an organization for women who look like me, who sound like me, a place where they can go to and just exhale. And so going back to your point, how did I do it? By expertise, by experience. I'm a marketer. I love data. I love data. I love evidence, numbers. I love that because we know that what gets measured gets managed, what gets managed gets funded. And so for me, when I stepped into creating this organization, I said to myself, what do I want to see and what do I want to learn? And for me, the answer was I want to map out the lived experiences of women of color in the workplace because that's my thing. Why the workplace? You probably will ask, and your listeners, because we spend 80% of our lives in the workplace. We spend a good chunk of our most productive years in the workplace. And so for me, I see the workplace as both a site of change, and I see the employers and the employees as change makers themselves. And so I had an existing relationship with a university. She's from Murdoch University back in 2020. I told her, I haven't got budget, but I really want to do this survey. Can you help me? And she did. Again, a white woman. And so we did that. We mapped it out, and first of its kind in Australia. And from there, we uncovered what we knew all along as women of color navigating mostly, predominantly white ethnocentric workplaces, that we're still being racialized in the workplace. This 2020, Annie, we're still tokenized, we're still, discriminated against, and all these other forms of woundings and oppressions. We had about 543 respondents from that survey, and about 70% were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, which is like, I'm really heartened by the fact that the first peoples of this land, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, see the organization as an organization that is standing in solidarity with them. And so from there, we asked the question: what can we do as an organization to help make your working lives a little bit better? What can we do? And overwhelmingly, they told us we want access to mentorship programs, to leadership programs, to coaching programs by us and for us, contextualized to our lived and living experiences. Because there are heaps and heaps of leadership programs out there, Annie, and you would know this, but you can probably count the number on your fingers, like how much are contextualized to our experiences. And so we answered the call, and then we approached the Victorian government. We pitched a proposal to them. They saw the merit, they saw the value, they saw the potential, and they decided to back us up. And from there, as they say, the rest is history. Here we are, But in 2024, we are rolling out the second Women of Color Executive Leadership Program, and that's because of the power of the evidence and the voices of the women of color who participated in that survey. So I'm always going to be forever grateful to our sisters who help us, be where we are now. Yeah, I'm grateful.
That is incredible. First and foremost, to put out a survey and to get us to speak up, because a lot of times these discussions, as you would know very well, Brenda, happen behind closed doors. We share with one another. We share about the things we are experiencing. And there's so much fear, particularly in the workplace. You don't want to say anything to already put you in a negative light. You're already experiencing all forms of discrimination. And then to add on to that and say that this is how you feel makes things even worse for you. And so to have heard people answer this survey is such a huge testament to how much is needed and the change that is needed, and then to respond, because again, people do surveys, they get the results, but they don't do anything with those results. And so we are constantly feeling like, oh, we've said what we need, but our needs are still not being met. And so for the organization to then go ahead and create programs that are needed, mentoring, executive leadership programs, is leading us in the right direction. And I want to talk a little bit about the board of directors that you have now as part of the organization. How did you go about reaching out to them and having them come on board? And the fact that they are actually all women of color, was that intentional?
It was very intentional because obviously, how often are women of color given the chance to sit on boards, become part of the boards? 0, 1%. We have to go back to the statistics. When I started the organization, I knew that, before we can elevate our voices as women of color, we need to center the experiences of, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and women. And so I was very conscious of the fact that we have to have First Nations women on the board, because, we need to be able to ensure that what we're doing, how we conduct ourselves, what we do as an organization is speaking to that solidarity with First Nations people. So we opened the opportunity, and people responded from all over Australia, and we're like, "Oh my God, what they say: if you build it, they will come." They came, they did, and we're like, I was so overwhelmed. And these are volunteer positions as well, and for them to share their time, donate their time, their talent and energy, Annie, to an organization who at that time we were an unknown entity, and for them to see beyond that, I have to pinch myself to this day, like, oh my God, you want to help me? You want to help push forward the agenda? And I'm just so grateful, for them to because where I am now, I see my role. It's very, it's a privilege and responsibility. And for this woman to come into the circle, it's, I'm grateful. I'm just so happy that, I get to I get to be in that community, and to witness every single day the dedication of this women to, like, what can we do, Brenda? How else can we support you, and the organization as well? So I'm lucky. I'm blessed.
Incredible. Yes, absolutely blessed. And I'm wondering, as you were speaking, do you think the racial awakening that happened back in 2020, globally, more so in America, in the US, do you think that it had something to do with the uptake and the appetite of people here in Australia saying, yes, there is room for an organization like this. Yeah, we can talk in this kind of manner? Because I know in Australia, having lived here for 24 years, that it is not our way, it is not our culture to talk about racism. It is almost taboo to mention it. It is very covert. Even how racism happens, it doesn't happen in your face. It is very covert. And so, do you think that that racial awakening had something to do with the uptake and how we are able to then have conversations and actually say things like women of color? And we are creating something like this to amplify these voices and these lives that have been sidelined and marginalized. Do you think that played a role?
I think so. The level of consciousness has certainly been raised. But if we step back, the first peoples of this land have been fighting for racial justice for almost 300 years now. And so for me, the fight has always been there. It's just that, we had to see this video of George Floyd being, murdered right in front of our eyes for us to say, you know what, I need to do something. And so yes, you're right, it really catapulted that awareness and that awakening. And so as you said, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years ago, this organization would not have existed. But because that happened, it really put the mirror up to the society, the mirror to Australian society. Hey, racism is happening, it's alive and happening, it's happening to us. What are we going to do about it? And so, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, definitely. It's, the awakening, the level of consciousness is much more evolved and much more mature. The conversations we're having, we can talk about racism now. It's not, who hush us. It's still like pockets, but here we are, an organization called Women of Color Australia, growing into wide spaces and talking about these woundings that are happening to us and what can we do. That's the most important thing there. Where to from here.
Where to from here? And speaking to those programs that you have, the mentoring program, the executive leadership program, there's even the Victorian Public Sector Women of Color Leadership Program. If somebody's listening, they're like, oh, I'm a woman of color. That sounds like something I'd be interested in. What is the process? Is this something that gets rolled out annually or biannually? What is the process?
It's really dependent on the funding that we get, obviously, because we need to have funding with these programs. But for example, the WoC Mentor program, that's our flagship, that's our national program. We open that every year as well. We are always oversubscribed, Annie, with the programs that we offer. Say, for example, the mentorship program, we were only offering 40 spots. The last EOIs, the last round, we had almost 150.
Wow.
And so this is the need, this is the critical need that's out there. Like, we want in. So the plan is to roll this out every year to make sure that we're opening the opportunities to as many women of color as possible, and ensuring that again, there's respecting the lived and living experiences again. So what we do is, when we match out, we are mindful of what do you need, what do you want to achieve out of this program. And always, if we step back a bit, we always have that co-creation process. So whatever programs we roll out, we always go back to the community. Does this make sense to you? Will this work? What do you think? We always have that because it's important. We can't just say we know better, because otherwise we're just using the same structures. We always go back. It's very important that we center the voices of the women in our community, that they're part of the design, the development, and the delivery. Most importantly, yes, we're about racial justice, but we're about economic justice as well. We want to make sure that the women, the subject matter experts that we are procuring, or we're hiring, engaging, are people of color, women of color, because we want to give it back to them, the economic justice. Because often we're like afterthought. Sometimes, they expect us, actually not sometimes, often they expect us to just work for free. Like, we're not doing that anymore. No way.
Yeah. And I love that collaborative approach that you have, which is power with rather than power over people. And so, Brenda, as we come to the end of this conversation, what are you currently working on as an organization? What conversations are you having? And what kind of support does the organization need right now?
Yeah, I'll answer the last question, the support, in terms, if you're a listener and you want to get involved in the organization, check us out. You can volunteer your time, talent, and energy. You can sponsor us. You can bring us into your organization. You can talk to your HR leaders, DEI leaders about the programs that we do and how you would want this particular program rolled out into your respective organizations. So instead of future plans, we want to expand our programs to all the states if we can. That's the plan. And to other sectors as well. So we want to engage with the women of color in tech, women of color in finance, in the manufacturing, energy sector. So we want to expand that. And then the other side of that, Annie, which is probably what's needed, is to engage the other side of the equation, which is the systems and the structures. We're in the process of rolling out specific programs that would answer that need, which is essentially, white people, come help us. How do we do things better? How do we ensure that this diversity, equity, inclusion work that we're doing is really centering the voices of the most marginalized, and they are benefiting from this initiative, from these programs? Because we hear a lot of talk about diversity this, equity that, inclusion that, but who's benefiting? Who's benefiting? And so for us, we want to engage with agencies, organizations, and ask them the question, who is benefiting from this program? Are you centering the voices and the experiences of the most marginalized employees within your organizations? If not, we can help.
Amazing. So my last question to you, Brenda, and this
Yeah.
one always kind of gets people like, ooh. The question is, if fear was not a factor, how would
Yeah.
you show up in your work?
Wow. I'm fearless, sort of. I go into this space as really demanding, Annie, but always, I still have that little voice inside my head. But then I talk to that voice and tell her, "You're right. You got what it means. You know what you're talking about." And so for me, when I go to these spaces, I'm guided by the spirit of my mom. I'm guided by the power of my sisters, and I go in not just representing myself, but representing my community as well. And as I've said, it's a privilege and a responsibility. So I carry that in my heart when I go to these spaces. I'm not alone. I'm with my sisters. Mm.
Yes, you are. You are not alone. You are with your sisters. And so, where can we find out more about Women of Color Australia's on social media website?
Yeah. So our website is called womenofcolor.org.au. So come check us out. Follow us on the socials. We're very, very active on LinkedIn because, again, workplace, that's where we want to create the change. We're on Instagram as well, but subscribe to our database as well. Subscribe to our newsletter so you get instant updates of what we're doing, future plans. And just talk to us. Come talk to us. And, come join the sisterhood.
And I will have those links in the show notes for you to check out. Brenda Gaddi, thank you so much for your time and wishing you all the very best.
Thank you so much, Annie. Maraming salamat. Thank you in the language as well.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.